Why? Why do you do this? So with this one, you've got halves, quarters, and eighths.
Hello lovely beans, welcome to a new video. I'm sorry I haven't really been showing my face for a while. I just sometimes get into this funk with the place I currently live in, where I'm not happy with any kind of background, including this one, but it'll just have to do for the moment. However, what I'm going to attempt in today's video, if I manage to get organized, is going to be the start of a little series, I guess, thing. I'd really like to start focusing my sewing endeavors rather than just sewing something randomly here and there, and direct my efforts more towards a vintage inspired wardrobe. Why don't I go hunting for vintage, like actual vintage items, instead of sewing everything myself? Well, quite frankly, vintage items intimidate me a lot. Owning and caring for something as delicate as vintage clothing it's just something I'm not quite ready for, especially with the place I live in. Like, I'd rather currently I'm started collecting brooches, which is also why I would like to start sewing stuff that, like, this is quite, it's not made to carry a brooch, so I'd like to have something that's a little bit more sturdy, like a lapel or something, so I can pin a brooch to it and not worry about the fabric being damaged. Also, thrifting in the UK is definitely very different to thrifting in the US, from what I can understand. So I'm going to try and make my own stuff. Coming back from that tangent, to that end, I am going to attempt to draft a bodice, block and sleeve pattern using my own measurements. Spoiler alert, this is not going to work, but I'm going to try it anyway. For instructions and guidance, I have the great good fortune of owning this book, which is the Pattern Making for Fashion Design by Helen Joseph Armstrong. I was lucky enough to be able to afford this from my birthday money this year, after the lovely Bianca over at the Closet Historian mentioned it in a few of her pattern drafting videos, and she was also so kind to answer a few of my questions before I actually went and bought it. I'll leave a link to Bianca's pattern drafting videos down in the description box, because my attempt is going to go beautifully wrong, and Bianca's videos just really nicely illustrate the process and how to actually make the thing rather than just crash and burn. The way the patterns are drafted here leaves a million ways to change the look and to make it your own, and because the lines that they use are quite classic, you can very easily adapt it to look more vintage, more 1940s, 1950s, so it's quite a good point to start from. Now, before I jump in, a little housekeeping. I'm still a sewing newbie, really a sewing newbie. My entire sewing history is effectively documented in this channel. I've not been seriously sewing before I started sewing on the channel, so bear with me. I know I'm going to make a ton of mistakes, so please don't come for me in the comments. I know I'm making mistakes, that I'm learning. Also, taking your own measurements is really hard. But that's enough chit chat for now. Let's just jump over and I will show you what I will be using in this haul. What I'll be using. Okay, so I've got, of course, the aforementioned book. I will be using chapter 3, Drafting the Basic Pattern Set. A set of inch-graded rulers, one simple straight one, an all-rounder curve, and a French curve. A pencil and a Sharpie with a 0.5mm tip. A pair of everyday household scissors. Graph paper. Now this is graded to centimeter and I bought it as actual pattern paper, which is nice. I believe the company is Prim. And lastly, some good old scrap paper to do some mathsing on. comes the really tricky part, and the one that I really kind of failed at in my first attempt: converting measurements. While I do have this tape measure with inch as well as centimeter grading, I have found the measurements it gives to be quite a bit off. It's not the best quality, and I think it has warped over time, so instead I use a true measure tape in centimeters. Initially I had converted all the measurements from centimeter decimals into inches and decimals, but then I kind of quickly realized that that was not going to work because the book works in fractions. Trying to calculate from decimals to fractions really quickly broke my brain though, so I went with this option. Did the warping of the tape influence the accuracy? Maybe? Possibly? I'll have to go and get myself a proper inch graded true to measure tape and compare that. Next, I'm just writing the final measurements into the spaces in the instructions. This can be quite helpful and speed it up a little bit, if done correctly, because some parts of the instructions ask you to add on, take away, or both. If you're having to work with 3 different fractions, that can be quite challenging. I've got the book next to me and all is starting off well enough. I'm drafting the first few straightforward lines, all neatly squared off, and squaring out from the main center front line as instructed per the book. These are all measurements as taken from my body, and some have e's added on or some taken away, each either an 1/8 or a 1/4 of an inch. And this is where I noticed that despite using Sharpie, the lines are really hard to see, and I just nip off to fetch a highlighter to fix that. Just going over those lines. Doesn't seem to help much, but maybe a little bit. And now continuing the drafting, squaring down the line from C that I had forgotten earlier, cover highlighter. And now I need to finagle this bit somewhat, because despite me being relatively short, the ruler isn't quite long enough for this diagonal. I need 19 inches and the ruler is a whole staggering 18 inches. Highlighting that again. Slightly dubious about this next one, seems to be a bit low. This is the point where I do slowly start to question whether I'm doing this right. Double checking the number and placement, still soldiering on unperturbed. And this prolonged phase of contemplation is simply due to the fact that I was struggling with the instructions because I thought I had missed a checkpoint. As you can see, the book instructs to mark from J to K, but it never indicates how to get J, until it dawned on me that both J and K are determined by squaring out from the AB line through point H. Anyway, moving on. After I had finally solved that mystery, I got back into the flow of things, measuring and drawing and squaring and marking and rinse and repeat until I came to the end to P point. Now I was entirely unsure of how to do this one. There was a 50-50 chance, and as is my custom, I choose the wrong one. I squared the 1 1/4 out to P from the N to I line rather than from the N to O line, though at this point that was only a marginal error. And here it really throws me off. Trying to figure out this part, not being able to wrap my head around because of a crucial mistake that I made earlier, not having enough space for my measurements because of that, and also mathsing wrong due to the pressure of being on camera. And right about here is the point where I realized that this was not going to work at all, ever, due to the very early mistake of using a wrong waist measurement. So after after the first attempt obviously crashed and burned, I went ahead and started a second attempt right next to it. The first few lines and points without a hitch. I'm also using a different marker this time. The orange one is for the guide and construction lines, and the blue is going to be for the actual lines of the final pattern. Finagling with that first diagonal again. I might need to get myself a yardstick at some point at this rate. Putting in that H point along the diagonal much higher this time, which will also not work. And side by side you can really appreciate the difference in the shoulder slope here in this take. And there is the next thing that makes me go, That J to K line I was struggling over the first time around, struggling again but for different reasons, just seems a tad short, a little bit. More guidance lines, the dart placement, and the new strap. So far so good, or so it seems. And yeah, no, this is where it starts looking wrong. Bravely soldiering on again, even though this looks wildly off. So awkward. And whatever the heck happened to the neckline? Here they are, side by crooked side in all their glory. You can really see how early I made my mistake in the first one with the green guidelines, literally the fourth line at the bottom. It almost looks like I was overcompensating in the second one. I went quite wide and the apex and the arm side are wildly off, and the neckline, they both just look so awkward compared to the actual one in the book. Needless to say that I was rather disappointed and also a little bit disheartened after this rather unsatisfactory result, and there was no way I was going to make a muslin from either of these. So I let it go for a day and had a bit of a think, took my measurements again and again. And to be fair, this is quite tricky to get right by yourself, especially on the back. Then I drew up another version of the pattern, and this time it actually looked like it made a lot more sense. here is the result of the third attempt with my own measurements. It's not terrible. While it is a rather pointy affair in the bust, it's at least not too tight. The shoulder is way too high and the back is slightly too wide and a little too long, just enough to come up in wrinkles. The arm side, on the other hand, is a fraction too snug, but the sleeve fits nicely around the upper arm. Then again, the sleeve cap is a teeny bit too much for the arm side to handle, and it pulls in the front when I raise the arm. I feel like while the darts are pretty much in the correct place, something isn't quite working here and I'm not quite sure what it is or how to fix it. Again, the back and front are slightly too high in the shoulder and the shoulder slope just isn't right. I'm trying to pinch some of that out. The shoulder dart is actually really good, but here you can see how far the back actually comes into the forward part of the shoulder. That should not be. The underarm is fine and the waistline is where my short-waisted self actually has her waist, but it just doesn't sit quite right. Especially with these Madonna-tastically pokey but low bust darts. Looking at all this space in the waist, I mean, inch or two for ease, fine, but this is a bit much, I think. So there is a bunch of room for improvement. Here we are on the table again, just for some comparisons. This is the basic bodice drafted from the standard measurements from the book. It's all nice and balanced. And this is my first attempt and fail. It's easy to see why. The B to E line at the bottom, as mentioned before, is all kinds of wrong. The neckline and shoulder slope are almost identical, almost just a little shorter. Here is the second attempt and fail. Comparing to the first, it's quite hilarious somehow. The second attempt has even less in common with the standard. The waistline is way off, the dart is a mystery, and the arm side is a disaster, and I don't even know what's going on with the shoulder and neckline. Here's the current state of affairs I used for the muslin. It definitely makes a lot more sense, but you can also kinda see what might be wrong. My shoulder slope and my waistline are both pretty steep, and I think even at scale my arm size seems to be considerably smaller. But this is definitely something I think I'll be able to work with. Now, the back. First, again, the standard from the book measurements. And again, you can see a strong difference in the shoulder slope and in the overall length, but the rest is relatively close. Notably, the standard has a seam allowance on the side and shoulder measurements, which makes it seem a little bit off. And finally, the sleeve, which I didn't actually show you, but it came out surprisingly well for the first try. The only thing I might do here is tighten up around the elbow, because that did kind of look rather baggy and bunchy in the footage, although for a jacket or coat sleeve I might actually widen it a little. Regarding the cap and the gathering, I might just leave that as it is for two reasons. Firstly, I'll try and gather the entire sleeve into the arm side instead of just the sleeve cap, and for secondly, I kind of quite like a tiny bit of gathering in the shoulder. I find it quite cute. So that was my first foray into the area of actual pattern drafting, and I have to say it was actually kind of fun. I didn't get the results that I wanted at all, but I think I learned a lot, especially about taking measurements and converting to inches. The book is great to work with, and the issues I had were mainly due to me doing my usual thing of running ahead and not reading the instructions correctly, and then also English is, despite everything, not my first language, so the biggest issue is probably the measurement taking. Holding the tape can easily distort where it lies, and especially on the back it's sort of it's not an ideal situation. So I'll be playing around with the draft I made, with the muslin I made from the draft, and might enlist the help of the man to take some proper measurements. I'll keep working on it. Thank you for sticking around and watching me flail and fail. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe and share. That would be fantastic and really help the channel and myself out. But that's it for me for now. Wherever you are, have a lovely day. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.